This emulator has been around for a long time, and I have to say that it is probably one of the most efficient and well put together emulators out there. I've been using it for many years, better part of 10 years actually at this point, I think. And the quality of this software is pretty exceptional. So um, I just have to say it's a personal favorite, and it's very simple to use. But let's go over how we start up from the ground and get all the way to multiplayer in the nicest way possible. So here you'll find the PPSSPP emulator download link. This is pretty straightforward. You hit download. You're going to come down to download a zip file portable. Now, the reason you don't want to do the installer is literally just convenience. Installing it as an app will put files in your computer's C drive, and it can be kind of hard to locate some of the things you might need at a later date. So we're going to download the zip file portable, and as with all the emulator stuff we're going to be doing, we're going to be playing right out of our folder on the desktop. That's the cleanest way to do this. So once you download that, this folder will be in your downloads folder, wherever that may be, and we're going to go ahead and build this emulator from the ground up. So we're going to make a new folder, and we're just going to label this PSP. I'm going to drag and drop in there, and we are going to extract here. That will bring the whole PSP into your folder. You now have set up essentially the PSP. Now you'll notice there's only one folder in here. When we open this, it creates your memstick folder. That is the first step you want to do. So you're going to open, create your memstick folder. Great, that's awesome. You're going to follow through memstick and go into PSP, and into this folder you'll notice you have game. To make this as compact as possible, you can use this folder as a native game storage folder on the PSP system. So we have a copy of Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. We're going to go ahead and just toss that right in there. Now you have Monster Hunter Freedom Unite in your game folder, and when you open your PSP, you'll notice Monster Hunter Freedom Unite is there. That is the game root folder of the system. You can keep your games in there, and you don't have to think at all about having them in a different place. All your games are going to be in one spot. It keeps things really nice and simple, and from there you can just run the emulator as is. I will say real quick that I'm running the Windows 64 because I'm in a 64-bit operating system. If you're running a 32-bit operating system, you can run this as well, but I recommend the 64 if you are on the newer architecture. So we're going to go ahead and start getting into some settings. I'm going to really quickly just enable full screen, make this a little bit easier to see everything, and we'll back up. So out of the gate, we have on our right-hand corner, we have our settings tab. The first thing I want to go over real quick is networking, because that tends to be the most complex thing we have. In your networking settings for the PSP, the first thing you're going to enable is enable networking. If this is not enabled, it may give you an error saying that a network could not be established or something similar. Make sure that this is clicked as on. That is the most important setting to start. MAC address. If you click this, it will generate you a new MAC address. You can do it a couple of times. Now, the chances of you downloading this and the initial MAC address being generated by somebody else is incredibly, astronomically small. But if that is the same, if your MAC address is the same as somebody else, you will not be able to connect. Very unlikely that'll happen, but you may want to change this a couple of times. The send Discord rich presence information literally just tells Discord if you're playing the PSP emulator or not important. Enable built-in pro ad hoc server. This is enabled on my server. You do not enable this, you are not the host. If you want to host on the network, you can, but that is a little bit more of a complicated feature that I have opted to leave out of the network. Initially, I was going to make things available for anyone to host if they wanted, but I got a little too complicated. So for general purpose, leave this unchecked. You don't need this. Now, here's the first setting that we need. Change pro ad hoc server IP. This right here is going to be the IP address of the server. This will be listed in the description below, but it is always the same as 192.168.192.2. This is my server's zero-tier IP address. It will be constant basically forever, so you don't need to change that. Once that's put into this emulator, you're ready to go. Chat. I actually love this feature. This is a new feature, relatively new, I think in the last year or two, on the PSP emulator. You can check this. I leave the enable quick chat unchecked. It just makes it more complicated than it needs to be. And this will allow you to chat in-game. It gives you an in-game chat window, and you can message people as you're playing. So very, very useful. Now, down here, this has been set to 10K by default, which is very nice. It didn't used to always be that way. This needs to be at 10,000 if it is not. Port offset at 10,000 is what's going to make it possible for you to see other people in the hall. If this is not checked, you may be able to connect to the network, but you won't be able to see other people. So make sure that this is set to 10,000. Okay, now let's go ahead and move up to controls real quick so we can start moving around. Instead of with mouse and keyboard, we can start moving with our current system. This actually has pulled because my game is functioning elsewhere. I think it pulled information from my actual emulator. We're going to go ahead and do a very quick clear all so you can see what we're doing. D-pad, I map twice on my system. So I can use... one moment. I will get to this explanation here in a little bit. I have multiple mappings for multiple different games. So let's go ahead and clear all again. For standard configuration, D-pad up and then D-pad down. We're doing 2 iterations, so I have both the D-pad and the left stick as a double map. This will allow you to use the right stick. This will allow you to use the right stick in-game and make things a little bit easier to use in stuff like Monster Hunter. X, going down the line, here, triangle, start, select, left, right, analogs. Now, as I'm doing this, you're literally just clicking and then inputting the button that you want done on the controller as you're going down the list. So fast forward, that is my right trigger, pause is my left trigger, and escape on keyboard. And then my open chat was right, and my screenshot was left. Now I have full working controls with the controller, and we're ready to go. Before we start moving on to graphics and gameplay, system, this gets kind of important. You're going to want to make sure that this is arbitrary. I just like to turn this to 32. You're going to want to make sure that fast memory is unchecked. This is a very important system issue that can be caused by this being checked on multiplayer. You can end up disconnecting. You can have game function issues. Fast memory, you don't want that enabled. Force real clock sync. I like this enabled. You do not have to have it, but what it does is it better lines up some of the in-game button timings. Sometimes in like Freedom 1, the button inputs can be really bad. This doesn't fix it entirely, but it does help. Lastly, we're going to want to come down here. Caching full ISO and RAM not required. I check it. I like having that cached in RAM. It makes it minusculely faster on slower systems. It is something I've had checked on my PSP for many years, and it's out of basically habit at this point. Not really required, but it does make sure that the game is immediately accessible in your RAM. If you have very low RAM, do not use this. This is not a good option for you. Now, we're going to want the PSP 2000, 3000 selected, and you are going to want to change your PSP name. This needs to be unique, so we're going to go tutorial. You don't want to leave that as default because it can interfere with some of the connection stuff. Everything else down here can be left completely unchanged. The big things, the takeaway here is fast memory. You want that off. Force real clock, a good option to have, but not required. Full ISO and RAM, totally not required. I have it checked. And then make sure that your nickname is changed. So we've now covered networking and system. You are basically ready to play. Graphics by default are usually set pretty forgivingly. So we're going to go ahead and click game. Oh, wait, one thing before we do. Audio always tends to be very loud. We're gonna turn this down just for the recording purposes. We're gonna go in game, and now I can hit my speed up, and I have no continue. Okay, because my character wasn't found. We have new game. This is where you're gonna make a new character. Before we get into that, I want to go ahead and just drag and drop my own character for ease of demonstration. Save data. Oh, you know what? This is going to need a specific folder. So we'll go ahead and save the character and then overwrite it. Yeah. New character will be tutorial. There we go. Confirm. Not a beginner. Save this character. There we go. Save data. Start game. We're going to hit no. Save data has been created, and I'm going to go ahead and just move my character's saved data over into this folder. This is your save data folder. It's actually an important thing to know for later in our next tutorial video, but we'll get to that. Okay. So, moving on. Here we go. So this is the quality of the game as is. The default quality is not a problem. It functions pretty well. But if you're having a hard time running this system as is, we have a few things that we can change. So going into graphics, back end, I use Direct3D. It tends to work pretty good with my NVIDIA graphics card. OpenGL is always a good option. It's very basic. It's very well developed for a lot of different hardware. If you're having trouble playing the game, try changing the back end to OpenGL. That's a good place to start. Render resolution 1:1. This will render it to be what your screen is as at auto. However, you can go as low as 1 times PSP, and you're going to be met with these kind of graphics. I don't think any modern hardware ever will need to run this low, but it is an option if absolutely needed. I prefer to run auto 1:1. VSync, I like that on, makes the screen tearing go away, makes the game feel pretty fluid. You don't need it, but VSync, when you're talking about fluidity in what you're doing, it's a great option. Frame skipping. Now, this is something I've just recently started working with. Not in Freedom Unite particularly, but in Portable Third, I have noticed that enabling frame skipping to 1 and auto frame skipping on, when these two settings are changed, it does prevent some stuttering, or most stuttering in game. So I do like to run frame skipping 1 and auto frame skipping. Now, all of these don't mess with speed hacks. You leave them essentially in this category completely unchanged. Render duplicate frames. Hold on, I believe that is okay. If you're going to render duplicate frames to 60 hertz, your frame skipping, it has to be enabled before you have frame skipping put to auto. Same with your force real clock. So if you want those enabled, make sure they're done before the frame skipping and auto frame is enabled. Hardware tessellation, that can be turned on. That's going to help your system. Hardware transform, everything else is there. Here we go. Texture scaling. This is going to be the first place where you're having major impacts to your system. Your texture upscaling is by default set to off. The XBRZ upscale type actually does help smooth out some of the lines in the game, some of the edges. But if you notice, my little hammer icon, I'll put this in front of this piece of wood, it's pretty jagged and rough. When we go to the in-game or the in settings XBR upscale, what we can do is we can like max that out to ×5, and you'll notice it's smoothed out. What that's doing is checking all of the edges of the game and all of the angles and stuff and trying to match them as closely as possible to smoother lines and prevent some of the older graphic jagged edges that we have. It is really CPU intensive though. So if you're having a hard time running the game, that is not a setting that you want to enable. As we're going forward in these settings, what you're going to want to do is make sure that these are off if you're having an issue running the game. If you have really strong hardware, you can go ahead and continue pushing forward. We can do auto max quality on our texture filtering. And then I like to have my FPS demonstrated. The biggest thing that we get to do to the graphics that really makes the game pop, and I want to show one more time before we get into it. The game looks pretty good now. We've made some upscaling changes. XBR works. There are other options in the upscaling section. You can use other settings, but XBR works just as good as everything else. The last thing that we can add is display layout and effects. Now, I like to have 2 of these. The first one really changes the look of the game, and it makes it really pop. Natural colors, no blur. When you do that, it saturates the game, and it really revitalizes everything that's going on. So if you look real quick, that to that. The in-game natural colors is very whitewashed, almost like there is a little level of bloom. This kind of brings those colors and has them pop out a little bit. Lastly, the heaviest hitter is the super sampling AA GOS. This is going to clean up any further sharp edges in the game, and it is going to allow your game to look as clean as possible. So these are the maxed out settings in game. You have the natural colors, you have the XBR ×5, you have the super sampling. This is going to be as smooth and as clean a game as you can possibly get. Now, going in reverse order, if things are not looking well, make sure that you don't have any of these on. While natural colors is not usually that CPU intensive, best to leave it off if you're having issues with running the game. Your upscale, this needs to be set to 0 if you're having an issue there. And lastly, you may want to see about changing the frame section of the rendering resolution. If you go much above ×3, it's gonna start getting higher than most rendered graphics resolutions on your monitor. So ×5 is, I think, at my monitor's resolution, or maybe a little higher. Going higher than that, it starts to just break things. So this is, I think, super sampling at 4K at this point. So there's really no graphical differences at this versus the auto 1:1. If you're having issues, I would check 3 and down to see if that helps at all. But with those settings enabled, we can now go back, double checking. We have our networking done. We have our port offset. Everything is still good. Let's let's go ahead and see about the gathering halls. Now, in this game, I have a test dummy, and you'll see network was initiated. Gathering hall 24. I have my test dummy sitting in here, and we should be able to see our server sitting at the bench. There we go. Network's been initialized. 0 tier, connected and running. We're ready to go. Now, as a wonderful guest, I have my wife helping out today. She's sitting in Gathering Hall 18 right now for a quick demonstration so you can see what you're supposed to be looking at if you have another player. Gathering Hall 24 is just to see if you can see other people, make sure your port offset's good and things are connected. When we come in here, we can see another player here. Mission is posted. You can see she's walking around. Everything's looking good. When you come to the board, you're going to check. You'll see processing for a second. And then we have a mission ready to go. I'm going to ready up, and she's going to send it. So a couple things to consider. Right here, it says preparing quest before it says the quest name and beginning quest. If it gets stuck at preparing quest, that is a known bug, and it can be very easily solved by just restarting your computer. Also, to quickly show it, if you get stuck at the preparing quest screen, you can come to your 0 tier right here, and you can just go to disconnect. It will disconnect you from 0 tier. You can come back to this again, and it will say reconnect here. Reconnect, and you should be ready to go. Now, before you do that, obviously, exit the emulator. Then you should be connected and ready to join in any activities that are going on. The small creatures in all the Monster Hunter games, none of them sync up with anyone's screen. So there could be a, Popo right here for me, and the Popo might be over here for Jax on her screen. The small monsters do not line up. However, their death animations, the damage they take, they do. So when I kill this here, even if the Popo was over here for Jax's screen, it will go down. So the damage is shared amongst them regardless of them being in the same place. Lastly, let's take a trip up to Area 6. The large monsters in the Monster Hunter games do sync up. And I want to give a quick demonstration of that before we get on to our next thing. Let's see. Oh, one other thing to point out. While playing in multiplayer, you do not want to be using the speed up option. Multiplayer is linked very strongly to your frame rate and making sure that it is in relatively synchronous gameplay in terms of your frame rate between players. So if all of a sudden your frame rate jumps to, 3,000 or whatever, you're going to disconnect from the group and drop out of the mission. I am going to hold off on beating up this Geodrome so I can let you see Jax is going to be hitting the Geodrome on my screen in basically the exact same place where I'm looking. Large monsters line up in each game, be it in this or in the Citra 3U emulator. Monsters are going to be different syncs based on what they are. Large are going to be synced across all players. Small monsters will appear in different areas in the game. So let's go ahead. Let's try and beat this thing up real quick. If I can hit it. There we go. So, Geodrome completed. That makes pretty short work of getting in and getting involved in the Monster Hunter gaming. This technically does work. We have tested on other games besides Monster Hunter. This is pretty specific to what we're doing on the server right now. We're primarily playing Monster Hunter, but I have tested Star Wars Battlefront 2, and it does work. That said, I don't have any dedicated server settings going for that game, and long distance ping times may cause some issues. We haven't tested that yet, but Monster Hunter Freedom 1, Freedom 2, Unite, and Portable Third all work just as well in all of the games. So with that said, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section of the tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Discord. I am happy to give any feedback if something goes wrong. Again, we are supporting the game for Windows, Mac OS, and Android, as well as Linux now. So go ahead, put it all together, and come join us. We'll see you on the next one.